Hello, and welcome to the Journeys with PDA Coffee Chat podcast, where we seek community connection and co regulation while chatting about all things PDA.
Welcome to the Journeys with PDA Coffee Chat podcast. I'm Kerissa.
And I'm Heather, and we're excited to be chatting with Lisa Baskin Wright. Lisa is a Neurodiversity Affirming IEP Coach.
Thank you, Lisa, for being here. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you're associated to PDA.
Sure. Hi. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me here today. I'm really happy to have this conversation. So I began my journey as a teacher, my professional journey as a classroom teacher, and ended up taking some time off from teaching when my children were young, and thought I was going to go back pretty soon after my second was born. And it turned out that she's disabled and needed early intervention services. And that ended up sort of changing my trajectory. And so as we began to engage the school district for support for her, we ran into a lot of bumps along the way that we weren't really anticipating, and took us on kind of a long and winding road to me becoming an IEP coach. My husband ended up actually publishing a book that was kind of his way of coping with our experience with public school. And he's a nurse and I'm a teacher, and neither one of us knew anything about like book marketing. And somehow we discovered Instagram and sort of Bookstagram within Instagram, and started to build his platform. And within that, I found IEP coaching. And at the time, I was actually working as a mentor for new teachers. And so much of that was driven by my curiosity about the learners in the room that weren't getting the support that they needed. And so I've always been a very curious person by nature. And one of my biggest pain points as a parent in the IEP process was the lack of curiosity about my child. And so that was a real driver for me in my mentoring work. And I found myself very, very quickly, we used to joke that like, not only was I sort of leaving my lane as a mentor, I was like leaving the whole freeway entirely as I was, meeting with parents and supporting, kind of on the down low and all the things. And at some point it just made more sense to, dive into this work more deeply and formalize it and, become a coach.
Sure.
And so pretty early on, after I hung my shingle, so to speak, Jessica Hanzo from PDA Project reached out to me and said, I'm interested in what you're doing and curious how you support families with PDA learners. And it turns out that Jess and I live like 5 minutes apart from each other and grew up in the same town and, kind of had lots of things in common we didn't realize at the start. And so she was the first person to kind of plant the seed. And initially, I would say when I first started coaching, one of the first people I connected with outside of Jess was Katia Piscatelli from Boho Speechy. That's her handle on Instagram. And almost every family that was coming to me had kind of a earlier stage Gestalt language processor, autistic learner. And every family, like this was where they were at, and the school team wasn't understanding natural language acquisition. And I would say about 6-8 months ago, that pendulum started to shift. And now basically every family that comes to me has a PDA learner. And so as that shift started to happen, Jess reached back out and said, hey, I would love to do a collaboration. And I said, that would be great. And she said, in the meantime, while we're thinking about what that could be, I have a family that is in desperate need of help. And so she and I ended up collaborating with this family. And I think I was so impressed by her and so curious about the family and the learner that we were trying to support. And this was a family that was in total crisis. And so for me, we'd a little bit gotten there too late. And so what would this look like had we had shown up before we hit the crisis point? And so when she and I had first started talking about a collaboration, we weren't quite sure what that would look like. Would it look like a webinar? Would it look like, some sort of downloadable document that we came up with? And after about a month or so of working with this family, 6 weeks, whatever it was, I said, I think we have our answer. I think we need to create a course where we essentially walk providers, educators, parents, anybody who, has a PDA learner in their life and they're trying to engage in the school system in some way, that we walk them through exactly how to create a program for a PDA learner so that we intervene before we're at that boiling point. And that's where our course was born out of.
Yeah, it's so hard to get that toothpaste back in the tube.
Exactly.
When you get to that point, absolutely. It's yes. Yeah. Just a general question for you, Lisa. What did you teach when you were a teacher?
I taught high school math.
Wow.
Yeah, I taught high school math. And my mom was a high school math teacher, so I was raised by somebody who, and she didn't take a straight path. She taught in all different kinds of school settings, and my mom is insatiably curious. And so she at one point wrote her own course and was really interested in problem solving and how kids think.
Nice.
I have a lot of her in me, I think. And so I always knew I wanted to be a teacher. I just didn't know what that would necessarily look like. But I will say, and this is mortifyingly embarrassing, that gen ed teachers aren't trained in the IEP process or about disability. I think we got an afternoon in the entire year of a credentialing program. And so, of course, I had kids on IEPs in my classroom. And I would be handled this huge document, and I didn't know what it was, and I put it in my desk. I think my natural curiosity, my fundamental belief that all kids add value to a classroom, I don't think I messed it up as much as I probably could have if I didn't have my temperament. But I remember this one kid in particular, he wanted to be called Skittle because he liked to change his hair color. Sweet angel. First mainstream math class he'd ever been in. And I remember the mom coming to me saying, "You're the first teacher to ever like him." And he was 16 years old. And my first reaction was, well, that's not possible. And then I thought, actually, Lisa, if that's his experience, that's his experience. And whether it's, empirically true or not, it's true for him. That was what he perceived, is that he was not ever liked, which I found abhorrent and completely unacceptable.
Could you imagine going through that many years of school? And he kept going.
And he kept going.
The fortitude that he had, what a brave young man.
Yeah.
And, don't give yourself grace about putting those IEPs in the drawer. And I'll tell you, as a former special education teacher, really when I went to school and learned how to do this, back in their mid 90s, there was a formulation. There was it was like, this is how the sausage is made. This is how we're doing it. We are the experts on the kids. We are the experts in the education field. Therefore, this is the document, and this is how it's going to be. At least that was my experience in the states that I taught special education in. So being on the other side of the IEP table as a parent is a completely different experience and process. Completely different.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I remember sitting in an IEP meeting for a learner that was not dissimilar to my daughter.
Mhm.
And everybody was just essentially talking about her quote unquote deficits
Yes.
in front
Mhm.
of her.
Mhm.
And I just remember zeroing in on her body language as she
Mhm.
became smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And I just thought, there is something fundamentally wrong
Mhm.
with this process. And I knew nothing. I didn't have kids. I was in my mid-20s, right? Like,
Mhm.
I was very new, but there was something fundamentally wrong with describing a human being in
Mhm.
such a pejorative way that didn't recognize her as a human being. There was no acknowledgement of her showing up,
Mhm.
whether that was to school, to the meeting, to her life as a human being. And I just remember finding the whole thing to be really despicable.
And inhuman.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
So often, I think that that parents actually don't know anything about IEPs. They don't know the process. They don't know what to say. They don't know how to handle it. And it seems like as a parent, you don't get involved in this situation until things maybe are like real tough. Um, so so it seems like, often these kids are going to be disheartened and discouraged. They're probably in a place where they don't like school, and parents are frustrated. So I'm kind of guessing that is the situation that that brings a parent um, to you, and so I guess kind of like if I'm the parent and I come to you and I'm like, man, my kid doesn't want to go to school and they think that they're worthless. They think that they're stupid and I feel like no one will listen to me. What's kind of that what's that first step in, what are we going to do first on this IEP path?
Honestly, the first thing I do is be the person who listens.
Hmm.
I'm the person that humanizes that child and reassures the parent that their child is a valuable, worthy human being and that it's not okay they don't feel safe at school.
Hmm. So, really, I would say the majority, in our experience, the majority of PDAers um, really, really struggle with school, attending school, with the work, and quite often, and this is my experience, they really, really want to go to school. They like the idea of school, um, but they just can't do it, and they just can't get there. And so if I say I can't even get my kid in the door, um what are we going to do? What do I tell the teachers?
I think it's really important, and I actually put a post out sort of touching on this today on Instagram, and Jess and I definitely talk about this a lot in the class, is that in the course, is the first step is to come to a common understanding with the team. If they are seeing this as willful behavior, if they are seeing this as a game that you're playing, right? So one of the things I hear from parents of PDAers, especially those that are like higher masking, where it quote unquote looks fine at school and is
Mm.
unraveling at home until the kid hits burnout and then they can't come to school,
Yes.
especially if there's been a bit of a tango around eligibility, right? Like we just don't see it.
Mhm.
There is an assumption that the parents are playing a game to try to prove that their kid needs the help and that they're just caving and trying to establish some sort of data that like, see, they can't come, right? As if there's some mischievousness happening. And it's absolutely not. The parent is meeting the child where they are. They are doing everything they can to maintain a trusting relationship with their child. They're humanizing that experience, and they fully recognize that it's a can't, not a won't. And they see that pain. How painful must it be to desperately want to be able to do something and not be able to do it?
Because we've had families they've been charged with educational neglect.
Sure.
They've been, Child Protective Services have been, called, um, and parenting classes have been suggested.
Of course.
Yeah.
So if we are coming at this conversation from such different angles, we have to do some of that work
Mm-hmm.
before we can even start talking about whether it's eligibility or services or
Mm-hmm.
whatever it may be. There has to be a real clear understanding that this is a can't, not a won't. And it's a tricky conversation to navigate. And parents are exhausted.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're in that place, if you've reached that place, especially if CPS has been called in or right, you're not trusting these folks.
Right.
So the last thing you want to do is expose any more
Mm-hmm.
of yourself or your child and make yourself that much more vulnerable. And I actually think that that's the step that has to be taken.
Mm.
I think that we have to kind of name the elephant in the room, so to speak,
Mm-hmm.
that we as the parents or caregivers feel like we are being seen as either playing games or permissive or whatever it may be. And we desperately need you guys to recognize and understand that this is nervous system disability. This
Mm-hmm.
is hard wiring.
Yep.
And you are asking me to violate trust with my child.
Mm-hmm.
Mm. Yeah.
I
And I
call that,
cannot do that.
yeah, I call that, that exposure of what the home life is like, and exposing it to just the outside world is just letting the sunshine in. We've got to let the sunshine in so people can understand
Yeah.
how difficult it is to parent a PDA, child. Yeah.
There was a point in time last year where I went through the whole IEP process and supports. My daughter desperately wanted to go to school. And so trying to make school safe was so difficult because I would just hear, well, she's fine when she's here, and you just need to make her just get her in the door. And I'm like, oh, great idea. And so my daughter was like, she was in so much pain, and you're talking about that pain, and I'm like, man, this is a child who is hurting, and you guys aren't hearing me say that. And as we were kind of trying to go through this IEP process, and she was at home, and we were doing our best to get her to school when she felt that she could manage it, no matter how, like, if it was 1 hour, then that was okay. But even though I had communicated, and she was already under an IEP, even though I'd already communicated, this is what's happening, I had to call the office every single morning and call her out for the day. And it was so frustrating for me because it kind of made me feel like they're playing that game with me. And I'm like,
Right.
you know where she's at, you know what she's doing, but yet you want me to call. But the funny part about it is, when you call, the school is supposed to report like illnesses and sicknesses to the county. And so when I would say, hello, this is Kerissa, and my daughter will not be in today. And they would say, so why? And so what I started doing is saying, because she's autistic. And I would tell them that every day. And I was like, we're calling in autistic. Okay? That's where we're at right now. Cause we're autistic and you're not meeting our needs. And like, I'm not beating around the bush here. And
Right.
I don't know if it ever made any difference for them, but it made me feel like fantastic because it kind of like gave some of that validation back to me in that, like, hey, this is like, this is a real thing, this is a real situation. And so I think I called her in autistic for an entire month.
Yeah. No, it's so disheartening to me when districts behave badly in these situations, especially when other districts don't, right? Like I have a district right now with a 5th grade PDA learner who's absolutely in burnout. We literally cannot get this learner on campus. And the director of special education is involved. And the classroom teacher is, I'll say, more old school, right? More worried about the academics and, all of the thing, right? He's not doing this, he's not doing that. And she has to represent that part of the team. And, a little bit of bite to her, right? And the director of special education said, I really appreciate your perspective, but he was so funny. He's like, I'm not going to say how many decades I've been doing this work. He said, but I started as a social worker. And he said, the academics are irrelevant in this moment because he does not feel safe on campus. And
Oh,
our
wow.
one and only job is to get him back to a place of perceiving safety.
Wow.
Ugh.
What a
And I was
diamond in the
just like,
rough.
sir, can I please hire you to like, provide professional development to all the people? Because here was this, he was probably about 10 years older than me. He's probably about 60. Been doing this work for a long time in this position of authority and power within a district. And he was just like, this is not what we're doing. And so the family actually was requesting home hospital. And here in California, and I'm not an attorney, so I can't even pretend to be one, and I'm sure the laws vary from state to state, but the federal mandate is that for a learner that's on an IEP, the district has to provide FAPE, free and appropriate public education, at all times. So in California, home and hospital is actually really not for learners who have an IEP because it's for kids with a temporary disability. And it's got a cap of 5 hours a week and like all these things, right? And so I actually have an attorney that I share with several families. And so I reached out to her about a different PDA learner where the family was seeking home and hospital to say like, hey, how does this work? And, yada, yada. And her response was, if this is a kid on an IEP, this isn't applicable and here's why. So in one IEP meeting, which was the one I had reached out to the attorney about, I was so tired of the back and forth and the nonsense and the blaming the kid and the blaming the mom that I generally keep my cool, but I lost it. And I said, I am going to read you an email from this attorney. And I did. And it shut everything down. It was like, we're going to have to call a part, 3 or whatever it was at the time. Fine.
Yep.
Figure it out. I read the exact same email in this other meeting. And the director was like, yes, absolutely. It shouldn't be home hospital. It should be home-based instruction because we have a legal obligation. And he goes, and we have a moral obligation to provide appropriate education and access to this learner, period. He said, home hospital is restricts us. It's not applicable. And he's like, you just check the box for alternative location.
How hard is that? I mean, how hard is that?
Right.
How hard is that?
It's
When I
not,
have,
because I watched it and I was just
when
like, and
when I have
go ahead.
what I have quoted from IDEA, where it says special education is a service, it is not a place. And then it's, then you have, and they're just like, well, this is how we do it. This is how we do it. It's like this child needs to be at home. This is where the
Right.
child needs to be. But they're just like, well, I'm like, it's in the law. So no, it's very
Yeah.
frustrating. Yeah.
It's very frustrating, but
Yeah.
what I'm excited about is that I have this like living, breathing example of this
Mm-hmm.
fabulous team. I actually
Mm-hmm.
have, this was all taking place during, he wanted to just do like a pre IEP meeting to just get a sense of like how the child was doing and where we were at. And today is actually the IEP meeting this afternoon, but he's already set precedent of like,
Mm-hmm.
this is what we're doing. And so I'm so excited about that because as a coach who sits in on meetings for all kinds of learners, but lately a lot of PDA learners and a lot of whom are struggling to get on campus,
Mm-hmm.
I have this beautiful example to say, hey folks, this is not only legally how it's supposed to be,
Mm-hmm.
it is absolutely possible. Like
Mm-hmm.
I have a team I am working with right now. Like make it happen.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't about what you do. We're not meeting the unique needs of the district. We're meeting the unique needs of the child. I need you to shift. So it's exciting to me. I mean, oftentimes, when we're sitting at that IEP table, it feels like we're just trying to get the program in place for this one individual learner, which we are.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it is an opportunity for that team to imagine the possibilities for other learners. If we can make this happen here, well, why can't we make this happen for another learner? Or if I have this understanding about this particular child, well, now I'm really curious about,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? So
Mm-hmm.
it's hard, especially when we feel beaten down, right? To not get stuck in, well, maybe I can make a difference for my own kid, but how am I making a difference more broadly? You are, because you're
Mm-hmm.
opening up that part of their brain that is curious. You didn't go into education because you're not a curious person. Curiosity was part of what drove you to this work. You're tired, you're overworked, you're stretched thin, you're working in a deeply flawed system. Curiosity is an action. And so you're too tired for that action. But I'm here to try to spark that in you. And once you understand that this is stress response, not willful behavior, once you see this child as a human in pain, it's going to trigger that part of you that went into education as a helping profession, right? You don't want this kid in pain. You do not become a teacher. You do not become a, pediatric speech language pathologist. You didn't, right? Because you
Mm-hmm.
wanted kids to be in pain. That's not what drove you to this work. So how can I help you reframe your understanding? And it's painful for them, right? It's painful to look in the mirror and go, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
I'm not doing this well, or I am potentially causing harm. And that sort of circling back to the beginning of this
Mm-hmm.
conversation of being more vulnerable is that when we share that painful journey that we went on, we
Mm-hmm.
give permission. Not only do we give permission, I almost think, speaking of demands, it's a little bit of a demand. Like, it's an expectation.
Mm-hmm.
I expect you to come to this with more curiosity. I am expecting you to see my child as a full human being. I am not here to tolerate you looking at my child through the wrong lens. Like, you're essentially demanding I don't even want to say excellence. You're demanding somebody to show up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Because that's what the bean counters count. I mean, truly, that's what counts.
Yeah.
Test scores and attendance.
Right. Well, there's
Yeah.
dollars and cents
Yeah.
associated.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. That's a whole other conversation there, but you're
Right.
absolutely right. You are
Right.
absolutely right. Yep.
Right. But if you put in, I say this with a little bit of a question mark, but if you have an IEP learner in home-based instruction or an alternative
Mhm.
setting, you should still be getting your $88.
Mm.
Shouldn't you be?
Oh,
Like, they're
I
in their
totally.
placement.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. I can't agree more.
I mean, I say that again, not as an attorney, so,
Mhm.
but
But as a common sense, coming at it as a from a common sense perspective. I mean,
right.
right? Just common sense would say this should be funded. This should be. Yeah.
Right.
Well, it seems like that would be a better option for the school than mom calling the child out every single day.
That's right.
So, like, yeah, let's get an alternative location so that they are attending versus I'm calling you out autistic every single day.
Right.
So I know, like, in my experience, we really, really, like, the huge obstacle is they were trying to tell me that she wasn't getting that, you know, the fair and equal if she were at home. And I was like, well, she can't get here, so she's not getting it here. So let's just do it at home until she can get here. And that was like really the deal breaker for us is, you know, they said, well, it's not fair and equal because she doesn't have her peers. And I was like, well, when she lays in her bed at home crying, she doesn't have them either. So let's, find that middle. And that was the big obstacle for us, is that we could not agree on, that location, because I wanted, the in-home instruction, and, then they're like, oh, yeah, we can't do that. We can't. And I'm like, I think that you can.
Right. Well, fair and equal is not the same thing as free and appropriate.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Right. Your mandate is free and appropriate.
Mm.
And fair is not always equal.
And fair is not
Right?
always equal.
Fair is not always
100%.
equal.
Right.
Right?
And identified as a learner with a disability, right? To use
Yeah.
the language of the law, right?
Mm-hmm.
She has been identified. She is receiving those services. She has certain protections in place, and you are mandated to provide a free and appropriate education that meets her unique needs. Her unique needs in this moment are not allowing her to access brick and mortar.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I am very curious to kind of hear your take on involving the child in the actual IEP meeting. So when we were doing this, and my daughter was in 7th grade, so a little bit older, I invited her to every meeting, and so she did make it to one meeting, and she was able to come in and kind of talk to the team, and then we had an escape plan so that she didn't have to stay for the whole thing. So I'm really curious, what's your opinion on involving the child?
I think it's super individualized. And I realize that's not a helpful answer, but I do. I mean, my daughter's 18 and she never once went to an IEP meeting. And the idea of it um, was extremely overwhelming to her. I have to say, I've had kids come. It usually doesn't turn out well. I feel like, I mean, I've had, and I'm thinking of my PDAers, like my older, like high school age PDAers. I've had teachers show up and just kind of lambast the child. You know, they're argumentative. They won't do anything. It doesn't matter what I say or do, right? And so then
So
this
now it's like
child
an
is
attack in a smaller confined area. Yeah,
right. It just
it's
feels like an
yeah.
ambush.
Mhm.
And so that's a problem. I've also had, I'm thinking of one child, he wasn't PDA. He wrote a statement basically begging for the help that he needed. And because he was, you know, articulate and had big dreams, they completely weaponized it against him. And so he only stayed on camera long enough to kind of read a statement and be asked a million questions. And I was cringing because I knew his very sweet and authentic answers were absolutely going to be weaponized. And so then he jumped off the call, but he just went into the other room where his mom was and just stayed off camera listening to it. And the team took the program specialist took his words, twisted them, and used it as rationale to not provide exactly what he was asking for. And this child was despondent off camera. And so then the mother was obviously really struggling to keep it together. And then how much do you expose to the team that you've just completely demoralized and degraded and taken advantage of the child? It's hard. It's a really, really hard call. And I think it takes a particular specific temperament to be able to tolerate it. But I also think when we hold PDA in mind and that autonomy and that equality piece, telling a PDA learner, no, you can't come to the meeting. That's not
Oh yeah.
necessarily your best, right? That's not necessarily your best laid plan, right? So I think, you know, the way you went about it with your daughter, right? There was desire to participate. You had a plan, you had an escape route, all the things. I think that it can be powerful. I don't think it's binary. I think there's more than one way for a child to participate in their IEP meeting, right? So it could be something pre-recorded, if that's right. It could be that they wrote something or they, you know, dictated something to you. It could be a number of different things. My daughter, she would occasionally write these, you know, I mean, she was younger and her writing skills she couldn't have written out a full statement. But I remember her like drawing a picture of a brain and saying like, you know, why does mine have autism? This was very early on in her, like, she was diagnosed at 8.5. And I think that we didn't realize at the time she wasn't able to articulate this for several years, but she felt like the challenges we were having with the team were her fault because something was inherently like flawed or broken in her. So if she wasn't autistic, we wouldn't be engaging in this battle. Like she took it on as her burden, which of course couldn't have been further from the truth. She was just humaning the way she humans, and the adults were being horrible and not seeing her as the human she was.
Right.
That's hard.
Really hard.
So speaking of that, it can be very difficult as a parent to go in and sit in the meeting, and it's like a whole session of what's wrong with your kid, you know,
Right.
and like how you're messing everything up or what you're doing wrong. Um, and so it's a very high emotion as a mother, to go in and like keep your cool. And because they're like, man, you're talking about my baby.
Right.
So what are some of the tips or suggestions you give to parents to sort of, how can they go into that IEP meeting, um you know, more organized, more prepared, so that they can kind of keep that emotion in check when all you're hearing are just like this huge lists of deficits.
Yeah. It's so hard. I think some of that work happens before the meeting.
Mhm.
So I don't know if it's a recipe that I follow, but I like to have families submit what's called a parent input statement. And the way that I write mine is I always start with a capture of who the learner is. So their temperament, their learning style, things they're interested in, maybe some information that, the team wouldn't know. Quick example was we had a PDA learner who spent 8 months on the pavement in front of the school in the fetal position. They couldn't get her in the building. And so obviously the team didn't have a real sense of who this child was because they only saw her it, when her nervous system was really activated. Well, this kid was amazing. And one of the things that she loved to do was cook. And so she'd like created this whole cookbook and done, right. But they would have no idea about that. Right. So this was an important thing to include, was that this child had this creative side and loved nature. And there was so much to her, well beyond, a
Mm.
person who is on the floor in crisis. Then I like to kind of go into where I want the team to essentially focus their goals. So it could be on, communication. It could be something academic. It could be, it could be anything. But I like to include in there strategies. And if it is a PDA learner, there's kind of two ways to go. Some families name it and call it what it is and want to be really forward facing with it. Others are afraid to name it and feeling like that opens a different can of worms, but they need the team to understand this is stress response and not willful, right? You can put forward strategies and sort of frame the child using language that's specific to PDA or not. But either way, you've got to kind of front load for the team that this is stress response. I also think it's really important, Jess and I talk about this too in the class, that you define for the team what engagement looks like, what sort of early tells of nervous system activation or dysregulation look like, what it looks like when things like when we miss those early cues, then what happens, and interweaving in all of those places ways to support and maintain cueing safety and engagement, and ways to support and engage when nervous system activation takes place. So that's one document. The other is if a child, say, has a behavior plan or their goals are written in a way that is, too top down, or separate document with revisions to those pieces, right? Revisions to the goals, revisions to the accommodations. And as my practice has kind of evolved over time, I've really moved towards, whenever I make a change, I now include some statements around the rationale as to why I'm making that change. So that there's some understanding as to like, well, Lisa's not just sort of throwing the baby out with bathwater because she feels like it, or like I'm trying to assert my control of like, I need this worded this way. It's, I want you to understand that the way this is written is going to elicit a nervous system reaction, right? And so we're not going to be able to get in. Or it's not clear to me what skill it is you're trying to teach.
Right.
One of the things that Jess lifts up and talks about and is so true is that sort of traditional IEP goals put all the work on the child.
Yes. Yep.
Right. And so
the onus of everything is on the child.
Right. So
Yep.
how do we sort of stay within the wheelhouse of what it is we're trying to support, but put the onus on the adult to create the environment with which that learning can happen? And so it maybe sounds subtle, but it's not. It's a big shift. So I take those 2 documents and attach them to an email, and that email always names kind of the elephant in the room, right? We haven't yet reached this understanding. This is the direction I'm hoping we're going. And these are the things that we're hoping to discuss and why. And it doesn't need to be a super long email, but like if trust has been broken, if you are in the situation where they're like, we can't do that. Yes, you can, right? Like, and you're just ready to pull your eyelashes out, name it. Name it in writing. You know, I have to be transparent with you. It feels like we're at a little bit of an impasse. So we need to start changing the dance move. And this is how it feels from our perspective. And what I'm really hoping for is to reach this common understanding so that we can have true collaboration, right? I am not here because I think it's fun to engage in a fight with you. I'm not trying to fight with you. I don't have the bandwidth to fight with you.
Right. I didn't wake up this morning going,
Right, I'm exhausted.
Right. We just
do it. Do the thing.
You know, I'm looking for my phone this morning, and it's, you know, like I can't find my phone. It's in my freaking hands. You know, and I'm like, just like I didn't wake up like going to battle with an IEP team to my list of things. Absolutely.
No.
So, and you were talking about the documents and the parental input letter. And I know that I have taken a course that you have written. I took it kind of as an independent thing, and it was, I'm going to mess up the name of the course, but it was like IEPs for neurodivergent learners.
It's a neurodiversity affirming approach to IEPs.
Thank you.
So close.
So close. Well, you know, again, couldn't find my phone this morning in my hand. Okay.
It's all good.
And I was struck with, you know I mentioned before, I'm a former special education teacher, but it was written very, very for the audience and the perspective of a parent. It's very, very obtainable. It's very, very, you know, you can understand it. And it felt like a step-by-step kind of approach and, you know, understanding the IEP and then how to look at it with a more neurodivergent friendly lens, you know. And now you have created another course that is specific to PDA.
Yes.
So can you, and you've mentioned a couple times, you know, throughout our talk here about it, but can you give us some more, you know, meat and potatoes of it?
Yeah, absolutely. So there is a little bit of crossover between the two, but the course that you're talking about, a neurodiversity affirming approach to IEPs, is a 4-module course. The PDA is 5. So, and Jess and I co-taught the whole thing. So the first module is what is PDA? And so Jess really leads that conversation. What's cool about this course, because it's co-taught, is the whole thing is essentially an ongoing conversation between her and I. And so she takes the lead as a therapist who specializes in PDA and is parenting a PDA learner. But, you know, I'm not a PDA expert, right? If I have an expertise, I'm more the IEP person. And so she would say something and I would find it genuinely fascinating, or it would elicit a thought or a question in my mind. And so I would ask her, like, oh, wait a second, this makes me wonder about such and such, right? The second module is very similar to the first module of the course that you already have taken, which is that overview of the IEP process. And so I took the lead on that module, but what's exciting about it is the same idea. Jess would stop me and say, well, wait a second, how does the PDA parent in this moment, right, like engage in this part of the process? Or what does this mean for, right? So it kept bringing it back home to PDA, and it was this conversation. The third module introduces FBAs and BIPs, so functional behavioral analysis and behavior intervention plans, and what they are, and why for PDA learners, the approaches taken with these things are problematic.
Mm.
The fourth module is, I think, worth the price of admission. We take the behavior intervention plan of the learner that we shared, de-identify it, obviously, and go through it step by step of where things went awry, and then we completely rewrite it. And so I take sort of the first half of that module is like an hour and 20 minutes. It's really meaty. I take the lead on the first part of it, of kind of going through what the team was seeing and how they structured it, and how that structure lends itself actually to being able to implement PDA aligned strategies, right? So an IEP is definitely a roadmap, but as much as I don't like behavior intervention plans, they are much clearer, specific. Child does A, you observe A, you do B, right? That is literally a script for how to engage with a child. They are usually written in ways that make your skin crawl.
Yes.
But they have actual scripts for the adults to say to the child. They have very specific kind of A to B to C to D strategy. So the swap out is almost easier than it is in just a general IEP like accommodation section.
Sure.
So we talk about how to present the changes to a team, what that can look like, because there's more than one way to do it. But Jess really gets into the weeds of, I think there's like, I don't know, 17, 18, something different strategies and accommodations. And she shares these anecdotal stories of like how she does these things, you know, with a learner in a classroom, because she spends time in classrooms doing observations for families and engaging with teams. And then the last module is similar to the last module in the other course, where we're looking at goals and goal writing. But what's really fun in this conversation, and I think it's taken up a level from my course that I did on my own, is PDA learners have more complexity than just their hardwiring, right? For that need for perceived, that need for equality and that threat response to perceived loss of autonomy. They're autistic learners,
Right.
right?
Yes.
Chances are they're Gestalt thinkers, right? They're Gestalt processors. Chances are there are executive functioning and sensory differences, right? So when we think about how to support the whole learner, we've got to be really careful about how we're supporting all the different parts, because some of the strategies that support PDA, like maybe don't support the Gestalt language piece, right? Or the executive functioning support is absolutely, the traditional executive functioning supports are going to trigger nervous system activation because they're going to perceive a loss of autonomy, right? How do we think about these things? How do we write these goals? And so similar to mine, we do it via case study, but it was so fun for her and I with our different perspectives to go, well, what about here? And, you know, so it was, I think, really, really fun. I just think she's incredible and so thoughtful. when we went live the other day to talk about the class, it was the first time she'd ever shown her face on Instagram. Then there's
Oh,
me
what?
who's there like, braless in pajamas and doesn't really care. But Jess has kept herself more hidden, and she's just got so much to share. And every recording session we had was a minimum of at least 3 hours, if not more. And so it was fun to go back and rewatch the modules because I couldn't remember what made it to film and what didn't.
Sure. And this course it just went live,
Today.
right? Today. Oh, today. Yeah.
Today
That's amazing.
is February 5th of 2024. And today the course officially launched.
I
And
can't wait.
it's just going to live on my website. It's fully asynchronous. You have access to the modules for a year. And obviously the downloadables, you have access to indefinitely. They're yours to keep. One of the things that Jess created that I think is so helpful when engaging a school team is she created this diagram. Essentially, it's like a wheel, and it's color coded. So safety is green, initial nervous system activation is blue, kind of moderate is orange, and then when we've reached kind of the building on fire, we're in red. And outside, like that inner ring, is what those different sort of stages look like for your learner. So if you are making something that is more abstract, concrete, and that she introduces in module 1. And then when you get to module 5, she puts all the accommodations of what works in the different, right? Because if you have a learner that is at threshold, the strategies that you would use for initial nervous system activation are not going to work.
Right. Oh, no, they're not, because they can't access the part of the brain that's going to make it work, right?
Exactly.
They can't. They're in survival mode.
They're in survival mode.
Yeah.
And so they're totally not in their thinking brain. So, right. So what I love about this, especially as it ties into goal writing, is our goal is for the learner to perceive safety. And so how do you measure that?
Right.
Right?
Because we've got to measure it. It's got to be measurable.
It's got to be measurable. Well, if we've defined what safety looks like, and we can point out what nervous system activation looks like, then we can write a goal that is rooted in some of these concrete observations. And that's very different than they're going to transition from a preferred activity to a non-preferred activity without misbehaving. My least favorite goal of all time.
That's right. With 80% accuracy. Blah, 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 blah. That's right.
Yes. Pull it together.
I'm having flashbacks.
Not good ones, Heather. Not good ones.
I could write me some goals. Let me tell you, they were not. They were, they were like what you just said, though. They were,
Lisa, you are so fabulous. It's so incredible, and it's so exciting to get to talk to somebody who is not a PDA parent, but is fully embracing what PDA is, and looking at these kids as really human beings and as a whole person. And it's really encouraging to know that there are people out there who do understand and really deeply care. So I think it's good to know, what are the supports that you offer? Do you coach people in other states? How can people, where can they follow you? How can they learn more about you?
Sure. So yes, I support families all across the United States. I actually have helped a couple of families abroad, in Canada, the UK, and Australia. But the predominance, obviously, of my work is in the United States. But yes, thanks to virtual platforms, I can join a meeting anywhere. So yeah, I have a couple of different ways that folks can work with me. The best place to kind of follow me is on Instagram, and my handle is at Lisa Baskin Wright. My website is the same. It's lisabaskinwright.com. And I offer a group coaching community, which is absolutely one of my favorite things. We meet every Friday at 9 o'clock California time. I'm in California. And the people that have joined this community are so committed to supporting one another and just being in a space with other parents and caregivers who have a similar perspective, that they are humanizing their child, that they want to learn, that they want to support others, that they really do want to engage with a team in a way that, you know, is collaborative and moves the needle forward for their learner. There are some families in that community that are not, their children are not in school right now,
Mhm.
and they're on a different path, but they they still want to be part of a larger group of
Sure.
parents and
Yes.
caregivers. It's
We
great
all need
because
we all need community.
we all need community. And so I just love it. We bring in guest speakers. We've had Tiffany Hammond, who her handle is Fidgets and Fries. She wrote
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
children's
hmm
book, A Day with No Words.
Yeah.
We've had TJ of Nigh Functioning Autism. We've had Erin Denola, who's an occupational therapist, and um, her presentation was fascinating, all about, you know, supporting sensory differences, and it was really mind blowing. I feel like I have to go back and re-listen kind of over and over to be
hmm
able to capture all of it. So that's one option. There's resources available to people within the community. People within the community get discounts to everything else, because I feel like if you're paying a monthly membership, you should have discounts to other things. Um, I have the two courses that we've talked about, a
hmm
neurodiversity affirming approach to IEPs, and then supporting PDA learners, centering connection, autonomy, and equality in the IEP process with Jess Hanzo. I know it's a mouthful. Um, and then I offer like 1 hour Ask Me Anything
hmm
consultations. And so some people use that as an opportunity to just ask questions, get a sense of their own situation, almost a therapeutic session of just like,
hmm
I just need somebody to brainstorm with me and be a thought partner with me. I have others that treat it as a total work session. I'm
Mm.
showing up with my kid's IEP. Can we please rewrite this mess right now?
hmm
Um, you know, and kind of everything in between.
Right.
I have some
Amazing.
people who sign up for multiple ones of those. And then I do support families in a more of an ongoing manner,
hmm
where I, you know, help them rewrite all the things,
hmm
uh, draft the emails, show up to the meetings, etc. So there's sort of tiers and
hmm
different ways to work with
Sure. And the best way for somebody to get in contact with you would be like maybe through your website.
it. Yes, there is a way through the website to send me a direct message.
Mm.
Um, and the other thing is, I'm really good about answering DMs on Instagram.
Oh,
Good.
I'm sort of queen of the voicemail.
This was absolutely wonderful and really encouraging. And so my daughter is back to homeschool right now, but it also sort of sparks some hope in me that should she decide that she wants to, go back into public school, I'm like, okay, I have some confidence in okay, there are ways to do it if that's what she needs. So I think uh it's going to be, anyone who listens is going to be really encouraged. So we're so incredibly
hmm
grateful for you just sharing so much knowledge and encouragement.
Well, thank you so much for having me. That's my hope. You know, at the end of the course, Jess and I talk about what was our hope for people who, you know, to come away with. And it's exactly what you just said, that they feel, you know, some confidence, a sense of hope in their own, wherever they are in their journey, and that, that they can start putting some of these steps into place before we've reached that boiling.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Lisa. So good to talk to you again.
Absolutely. So good to talk to you too.
And for anyone who is looking to learn more about pathological demand avoidance autism profile, you can find lots of resources on the Journeys with PDA website. And then we also have Facebook and Instagram as well. And we are pretty good at getting back to our messages too. So lots of ways to reach us. So thank you again.
Bye-bye, everybody.